Rory knew before he came to New York what sort of life he would have. He'd read about it in novels by hip young authors who lived there. He was a photographer's assistant, loading cameras all day, holding up light meters, waving Polaroids until they were dry enough to tear open. As he watched the models move, he sometimes worried he was still too California. What could you do with sandy blonde hair? Short hair was on the wane, so there it hung, golden, reminiscent of beaches he'd never seen, being as he was from Chicago. He was always the last to leave. His boss, Vesuvi, would hand him the camera as soon as the last shot was done and then swan out through the sea of film containers, plastic cups, and discarded sheets of backdrop paper. Rory swept the debris into bags, then he turned out the lights, locked up the studio, and headed down to the street. Twilight was his favorite hour. Metal gates sliding down over storefronts, newspapers whirling from the sidewalk into the sky, an air of promise and abandonment. This was the way he'd expected New York to look, and he was thrilled when the city complied. He took the subway uptown to visit Stacy, a failing model whom he adored against all reason. Stacy never acknowledged that she was failing, though it was obvious. Rory longed to bring it up, to talk it over with her, but he was afraid to. She lay on her bed, shoes still on. A Diet Coke was on the table beside her. She weighed herself each morning, and when she was under 120, she allowed herself a real Coke that day. "What happened at Bazaar?" Rory asked. "The usual. I'm too commercial." She shrugged, but Rory could see she was troubled. On my next go-see, the guy kept looking at me and flipping back and forth through my book, and of course I'm thinking, fantastic, he's gonna hire me. So you know what he finally says? "I'm not ugly enough." She turned to Rory. He saw tears in her eyes and felt helpless. 8 months before, she had bought her own ticket to New York from Cincinnati. Stacy hoped to ride the wave of her success around the world. Paris, Tokyo, London, Bangkok. The shelves of her tiny apartment were cluttered with maps and travel books. She stood and crossed the room, then leaned over and pressed her palms to the floor. She had been a gymnast in high school and was still remarkably limber. This limberness delighted Rory in a way that almost shamed him. Stacy stood up, flushed and peaceful again. "Let's get out of here." Rory and Stacy walked arm in arm, peering into the windows of restaurants as eagerly as diners peered out of them. "Where should we go?" Stacy asked. Rory cracked his knuckles one by one. The question made him edgy, as if there were some right answer he should know. Where were the people who mattered? Occasionally, Rory would be stricken with a sense that they had been exactly where he was only moments before, but had just left. At Stacy's suggestion, they took a cab to a Tribeca bistro, where Vesuvi often went. It was probably expensive, but Rory had just been paid. What the hell? He'd buy Stacy dinner. Inside the restaurant, Rory spotted Vesuvi himself. Or rather, Vesuvi spotted him and called out with a heartiness that could only mean he was bored with his present company. Rory and Stacy sat down. He could see she was nervous. The girls at the table were faces you saw around a lot. Red-headed Daphne, Inga with her guppy face, others whose names he'd forgotten. What distressed him was seeing Anushka, a moody girl whose journey from some dour Siberian town to the height of New York fashion seemed to have happened in an afternoon. Once, she had lingered at the studio while Rory cleaned up after work, flipping aimlessly through his copy of The Great Gatsby. "My father is a professor. He teaches this book." "In Russian?" Anushka laughed. "Sure. Why not?" Outside the studio, Rory and Anushka had hovered uncertainly in the dusk. He blundered forward and hailed a cab, leaving Anushka standing on the curb, then paid the driver 3 blocks later, mystified by his own idiotic behavior. Rory looked at Vesuvi, sprawled amid the models, sphinx-like, olive-skinned, his close-cropped beard peppered with gray. He was eyeing Stacy. "You look familiar. Did I use you for something?" "Once. 4.5 months ago." "Right, I remember now. It was that..." He waved a languid hand, which meant he had no idea. "For Elle?" she said. "Bow ties?" It had been her best job, and she was crushed when the pictures the magazine printed had failed to include her head. She kept them pasted to her bathroom mirror. "You worked for Elle?" Anushka asked Stacy. "Once," Stacy said. "So far," Rory quickly added. Anushka glanced at him and then at Stacy with the same startled look she'd worn when Rory left her on the curb. He felt guilty all over again. "When do you leave for Tokyo?" Anushka asked Inga. "Next week. Have you been?" 2 years ago. It's okay, but when you take the morning airplanes, you see the Japanese men are coughing their lungs into the trash cans. Ugh, they smoke like crazy. Rory listened miserably. Poor Stacy was barely surviving in New York, and here was Anushka, who had not only been to Japan, but had the luxury of complaining about it. Anushka glanced at him. "Still," she said, "the culture of Japan is quite important, the museums and this sort of thing." "You inside a museum?" Vesuvi said. "That I don't see. You must have gone there on location." Anushka blushed to the neck. Helplessly, she turned to Stacy. "You have been to Japan?" "Ah, I wish. But Milano? Yes?" "No. Paris?" Stacy shook her head, and Rory noticed a change in Anushka's face as she sensed her advantage. Vesuvi sat forward, looking from Anushka to Stacy with great interest, as if they were posing for him. "You never worked in Paris?" "I think everyone has worked in Paris." "I've never been to Paris." Rory saw Stacy's hand shake as she lifted her glass, and was overcome with sudden and absolute hatred for Anushka. "So, what places you have been?" Stacy didn't answer at first. She looked double-jointed in her chair, heaped like a marionette. "I've been to New York." There was a beat of silence. "New York," Anushka said. Vesuvi started to laugh. He had a loud, explosive laugh that startled Rory at first. He had never heard it before. "New York? That's priceless." Stacy smiled. She seemed as surprised as everyone else. A chuckle passed through the group like a current. Rory found himself laughing without knowing why. His boss gazed at Stacy in the soft-eyed way he looked at models when his shoot was going well. "It's a hell of a place, New York, no?" "The best. But she has gone only here," Anushka protested. "How does she know?" "Oh, she knows," Rory said. He felt reckless, dizzy with the urge to make Anushka angry. "You don't get it, do you?" Vesuvi dabbed with a napkin at his heavy-lidded eyes. "Next time you go to New York," he told Stacy, "take me with you." This was too much for Anushka. She jumped to her feet. "I am in New York. You are in New York. Here is New York." But laughter had seized the table, and Anushka's protests only made it worse. "Go back to Japan," Rory cried. Anushka fixed her eyes on him. Her makeup made them look burned at the rims, and the irises were a bright, clear green. To his astonishment, the charred-looking eyes filled with tears. "I hate you, Rory." She yanked her bag from under the table and hoisted it onto her shoulder. "Hey," Vesuvi said, standing and putting his arms around Anushka. "Hey, we're just having a joke." Stacy and Rory traded a look and stood up. Rory opened his wallet to pay for the drinks, but Vesuvi winced and waved it away. Vesuvi spoke to Stacy. "I've got something coming up you'd be perfect for. Who are you with again?" Stacy told him, barely able to contain her joy. Rory listened unhappily. Vesuvi said this all the time to girls and forgot the next minute. They left the restaurant and headed toward the East Village. Rory longed to reach for Stacy's hand, but she seemed far away from him now, lost in her thoughts. He searched the dark shop fronts for something, some final thing at the core of everything else, but he found just his own reflection and Stacy's. Their eyes met in the glass, then flicked away. And it struck him that this was New York, a place that glittered from a distance, even when you reached it. They climbed the 4 flights to Rory's apartment. Stacy opened the refrigerator. Rory always kept a supply of Cokes for her in there. Diet, of course, but also some regulars in case she had earned one that day. To his surprise, she pulled out a can of regular now. What the hell? I mean, really, what difference does it make? Rory stared at her. She had never said anything like this before. What about Vesuvi? Vesuvi won't hire me. You know it perfectly well. Stacy slid open the window and climbed out onto the fire escape. The sky was a strange, sulphurous yellow, beautiful, yet seemingly disconnected from nature. Stacy drank in tiny, careful sips. He needed to say something to her, he knew that, but he wasn't sure how. He climbed out and sat beside her. They held hands tightly as if something was about to happen. So maybe it doesn't work, he said. The modeling. Maybe that just won't happen. He searched her face for some sign of surprise, but there was none. She watched him calmly, and for the first time, Rory felt that Stacy was older than he, that her mind contained things he knew nothing of. She stood up, and she grasped the railing of the fire escape and lifted her body into a handstand. Rory held his breath, watching in alarmed amazement as the slender wand of her body swayed against the yellow sky. She hovered there for what seemed a long time before finally bending at the waist and standing straight again. If it doesn't work, she said, then I'll see the world some other way. She took Rory's face in her hands and kissed him on the mouth, hard, with a fierce, tender urgency of someone about to board a train. Rory stared at her, oddly frightened to think that she would do it. She would find some way. He pictured Stacy in a distant place, looking back on him on this world of theirs as if it were a bright, glittering dream she had once believed in. Take me with you, he said.
Andrew Scott was reading Emerald City, the title story from Jennifer Egan's new collection. It was abridged by Miranda Davis, and the producer was Di Spears.